along a dusty secondary highway cutting through the vast Texas countryside where golden wheat fields stretched endlessly toward the horizon, a peculiar sight had become part of the landscape. A weathered German shepherd, his coat dulled by years of exposure to the elements, maintained an unwavering vigil at the same spot day after day, season after season. Local residents had grown accustomed to his presence, this silent sentinel who had earned the name Highway Dog among passing travelers. For 4 years, the dog remained there, his noble stance and attentive gaze fixed on the passing vehicles, as if searching for something or someone among the countless faces that drove past. Some locals tried to rescue him, offering food and shelter, but he politely declined their gestures, accepting only the occasional meal before returning to his post. His determination was as mysterious as it was touching, and soon he became something of a local legend. Ethan Carter, an investigative journalist from Houston, had driven past this spot countless times on his work assignments. He'd always noticed the solitary dog by the roadside, but had never given it much thought until one particular autumn afternoon. Something about the animal's demeanor caught his attention. It wasn't the look of a lost or disoriented creature, but rather of one who knew exactly where he needed to be. The dog's unwavering patience and the way his eyes followed certain vehicles with intense focus intrigued Ethan. There was an intelligence in those eyes that spoke of purpose rather than confusion. Pulling over to the side of the road, Ethan watched as the dog acknowledged his presence with a dignified glance before returning his attention to the passing traffic. At the nearby roadside diner, Donna Martinez, the owner, shared what she knew about the mysterious canine. "He's been here for years," she told Ethan over a cup of coffee, "always at the same spot, watching and waiting. We've all tried to help him, but he won't leave. It's like he's bound to that place by some invisible thread." The more Ethan learned, the more his journalistic instincts tingled. He began gathering information, interviewing locals, and digging through old records. His breakthrough came when he accessed state police archives and discovered an incident report from 4 years ago. The document mentioned a German shepherd named Ranger belonging to the Callahan family. The dog had vanished following a serious car accident on this very highway. Ethan's heart raced as he realized the accident site was less than a mile from where the dog had established his vigil. Could it be possible? Had this loyal companion survived the tragic event and returned to the closest familiar location, waiting for a reunion that seemed impossible? The journalist's investigation took an unexpected turn when he decided to share the story on social media. His post included recent photos of the dog and details about the possible connection to the Callahan family. As the story began to circulate, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that he was on the verge of uncovering something extraordinary. Little did he know that hundreds of miles away in Denver, Colorado, his social media post was about to trigger a chain of events that would change multiple lives forever. The mystery of the highway dog was about to unravel in ways no one could have predicted, revealing a tale of loyalty, love, and unwavering faith that would touch hearts across the nation. As the sun set on another day of Ranger's vigil, the autumn wind carried whispers of change. Soon, very soon, his patient wait would face its greatest test, and the true depth of his devotion would come to light in ways that would leave even the most skeptical observers in awe of the bonds that can exist between humans and their faithful companions. If this story has touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave a like. Tell us which city you're watching from. Let's continue. In a cozy suburban home in Denver, Colorado, 15-year-old Jake Callahan sat at his desk, mindlessly scrolling through his social media feed. The afternoon light filtered through his window, casting a warm glow on the collection of photographs pinned to his bulletin board. Most of them featured a younger version of himself alongside a majestic German shepherd, pictures from what seemed like another lifetime. His finger stopped mid-scroll as a familiar image caught his eye. At first, he thought his mind was playing tricks on him, showing him what he desperately wanted to see. But there it was, a weathered German shepherd standing vigilantly by a Texas highway. The article accompanying the photo detailed the mystery of a dog that had maintained a 4-year vigil at the same location. Jake's hands trembled as he clicked through the photos. Each new image confirmed what his heart already knew: those eyes, that stance, the distinctive marking on the chest. It was Ranger. His Ranger, the loyal companion he'd thought was lost forever, was alive, waiting faithfully all these years. Sarah Callahan was preparing dinner when she heard her son's hurried footsteps thundering down the stairs. The look on Jake's face made her pause. It was a mixture of excitement and disbelief she hadn't seen since before they left Texas. When he thrust his phone in front of her, she initially resisted looking at the screen. She had learned to protect herself from false hopes over the years. "Mom, please," Jake pleaded, his voice cracking with emotion. "Just look." With hesitant eyes, Sarah glanced at the screen. The moment she saw the image, the wooden spoon she was holding clattered to the floor. She grabbed the phone with trembling hands, zooming in on the dog's face. Despite the years that had passed, despite the weathered appearance, she recognized him immediately. How could she not? Ranger had been more than a pet. He had been family. Memories flooded back. Ranger playing with Jake in their backyard, standing guard by Jake's bed during thunderstorms, joining their morning jogs, and always watching over them with those intelligent, devoted eyes. The day they lost him had marked the beginning of a dark chapter in their lives, one that had prompted their move to Denver in search of a fresh start. "We have to go," Jake said, his voice firm with determination. "We have to get him, Mom. He's been waiting for us." Sarah sank into a kitchen chair, her mind racing. She had almost returned to Texas countless times over the years, but fear had always held her back. The memories were too painful, the loss too raw. But now, knowing that Ranger was alive, that he had spent 4 years waiting faithfully by that highway, how could they not go? That evening, mother and son sat at their kitchen table, planning their journey back to Texas. Jake pulled out an old shoebox from his closet, filled with memories of Ranger, his old collar, favorite toys, and a small bone-shaped keychain that used to hang from his collar. Each item told a story of happier times, of a family whole and complete. As they made their preparations, Sarah watched her son's renewed energy with a mixture of hope and apprehension. "Jake," she said softly, "it's been 4 years. Ranger might not be the same dog we remember. We need to be prepared for that." Jake nodded, clutching the bone-shaped keychain. "I know, Mom, but he remembered us enough to stay there all this time. He never gave up on us. We can't give up on him." The decision made, they packed their car for the long drive to Texas. The journey ahead would be more than just a road trip. It would be a journey back in time to face the past they'd left behind. As they pulled out of their driveway in the early morning hours, both Sarah and Jake knew their lives were about to change again. What they couldn't know was just how challenging their reunion with Ranger would be, or the depths of patience and love it would require to heal the wounds that time and separation had created. The faithful guardian had waited 4 years for this moment, but would his faith in them remain unshaken after so long apart? The Texas sun hung low on the horizon as Sarah's car approached the familiar stretch of highway. Jake's heart pounded against his chest, his eyes scanning the roadside with increasing intensity. They had driven for hours, stopping only when necessary, their anticipation growing with each mile that brought them closer to their destination. Ethan Carter, the journalist who had first shared Ranger's story, met them at Donna's roadside diner. He had been updating them throughout their journey, ensuring that Ranger was still maintaining his vigil. The experienced reporter couldn't help but be moved by the emotion in Jake's eyes as the teenager clutched the old, bone-shaped keychain, turning it over and over in his hands. "He's still there," Ethan assured them, pointing through the diner's window to a distant figure by the roadside. "Hasn't moved from his spot. I think he knows something's different today." Sarah gripped her coffee cup tightly, her knuckles white with tension. Through the window, she could see the familiar silhouette of their former companion, standing proud despite his weathered appearance. The sight made her throat tight with emotion. 4 years of sun, rain, and solitude had taken their toll on his once glossy coat, but his noble bearing remained unchanged. Jake stood up abruptly, unable to wait any longer. "We need to go to him," he said, his voice trembling with a mixture of excitement and fear. Sarah nodded, knowing this moment couldn't be delayed any further. Together they stepped out into the warm Texas afternoon. The approach to Ranger's spot felt like walking through a dream. The faithful dog stood alert, his eyes fixed on the approaching figures. There was no immediate recognition in his gaze, just the careful, measured observation of one who had learned to be cautious through years of solitude. "Ranger?" Jake called softly, his voice carrying on the gentle breeze. The dog's ears twitched at the sound, but he remained still, watching. When they got closer, Sarah gasped softly. Ranger's eyes held a wisdom and wariness that hadn't been there before. The carefree companion of their past had been replaced by a more guarded soul. Jake took a step forward, his hand extended, holding the bone-shaped keychain. "Hey boy, it's me, it's Jake, remember this? Remember your lucky charm." His voice cracked with emotion as he spoke, tears streaming down his face. Ranger's posture shifted slightly, his nose lifting to catch their scent on the wind. There was a flicker of something in his eyes, a shadow of recognition perhaps, or a memory struggling to surface. But he didn't bound forward as they had hoped. Instead, he took a single step backward, maintaining the distance between them. Sarah watched the interaction with a breaking heart, understanding dawning in her eyes. "He's afraid to believe," she whispered to Ethan, who stood quietly observing the scene. 4 years of waiting. Maybe it's easier for him to keep waiting than to risk being hurt again. The reunion they had imagined, full of joyful barks and wagging tails, was instead a delicate dance of approach and retreat. Ranger wouldn't come closer, but he also wouldn't run away. He remained in his self-appointed post, watching them with intense focus, as if trying to reconcile the familiar scents and voices with his years of solitary vigilance. As the sun began to set, Sarah and Jake settled on the grass near Ranger's spot, but not too close. They began talking softly, sharing memories of their life together, their voices carrying on the evening breeze. Ranger listened, his ears moving to catch every word, his eyes never leaving them. Donna brought them dinner from the diner, and they picnicked there by the roadside, occasionally tossing pieces of hamburger toward Ranger, who would wait until they looked away before quickly snatching the offerings. It wasn't the reunion they had dreamed of, but it was a beginning. As darkness fell, they faced a new challenge. They couldn't leave him here, but they also couldn't force him to come with them. The years of separation had created invisible barriers that wouldn't be broken down in a single afternoon. They would need patience, understanding, and a new kind of faithfulness to match the unwavering dedication Ranger had shown them. The first week of trying to rebuild their bond with Ranger proved more challenging than Sarah or Jake had anticipated. They had rented a small house near Donna's diner, unwilling to force Ranger too far from the spot that had been his anchor for so long. Each day brought its own set of small victories and heartbreaking setbacks. Ranger would follow them to the house, but refused to step inside. Instead, he created a new post for himself under the front porch, maintaining a careful distance while staying close enough to watch their movements through the windows. Sarah would leave food and water on the porch, and just like at the highway, Ranger would wait until they moved away before approaching his bowls. Jake spent hours sitting on the porch steps, talking softly to Ranger about everything that had happened in the past 4 years. his new school in Denver, the friends he'd made, the times he'd dreamed about their reunion. Sometimes, Ranger's ears would perk up at certain words or phrases, but the invisible wall between them remained firmly in place. "Maybe we're expecting too much too soon," Sarah said one evening, watching Jake's disappointed face as another attempt to pet Ranger resulted in the dog backing away. "He spent 4 years in survival mode, Jake. Trust isn't something that can be rebuilt overnight. But breakthrough moments, though small, did occur." On their 5th day, during a particularly warm afternoon, Jake was practicing with his old harmonica on the porch, the same one he used to play when Ranger was a puppy. The familiar melody drifted through the air, and for the first time, they saw Ranger's tail move in what might have been a hint of a wag. Encouraged by this response, Jake began playing more often, recreating the songs from their shared past. Each time, Ranger's reactions became slightly more noticeable. His body would relax, his eyes would soften, and sometimes he would even lie down closer to the steps while Jake played. Sarah, meanwhile, discovered that reading aloud seemed to have a calming effect on Ranger. She began sitting in a rocking chair on the porch each evening, reading from Jake's old storybooks, the same ones she used to read when Ranger would curl up at their feet during story time. While he still maintained his distance, his eyes would remain fixed on her, following her every movement. The most significant progress came unexpectedly during a thunderstorm. Jake had always been afraid of storms as a child, and Ranger had been his protector during those frightening nights. As lightning illuminated the sky and thunder shook the house, Jake sat on the porch, watching the rain. To his surprise, Ranger moved closer than he ever had before, positioning himself between Jake and the storm, just as he used to do years ago. For a brief moment, Jake felt Ranger's familiar presence beside him, solid and protective. He held his breath, fighting the urge to reach out and touch the dog's fur, knowing that any sudden movement might break this fragile moment of trust. They sat together, watching the storm, connected by a thread of memory that even 4 years couldn't completely sever. The following days brought subtle changes in Ranger's behavior. He began accepting treats directly from Jake's hand, though he would quickly retreat afterward. He started responding to his name, turning his head when called, though he still wouldn't come when summoned. Each small sign of progress felt like a victory, a tiny piece of their old bond slowly being reconstructed. One particularly meaningful moment came when Sarah was bringing in groceries. She dropped a bag, spilling apples across the porch. Before she could react, Ranger approached and gently nudged one of the rolling fruits back toward her with his nose. For a split second, their eyes met, and Sarah saw a flicker of the old Ranger, the helpful, caring companion who had been such an integral part of their family. But despite these promising moments, Ranger's trauma ran deep. Any unexpected noise would send him retreating to his spot under the porch. Car doors slamming in the distance would make him tense up, and passing trucks would draw his attention back to the highway, as if he was still unsure whether he should return to his years-long vigil. As the second week of their reunion approached, Sarah and Jake realized that healing Ranger's emotional wounds would require more than just love and patience. It would demand a complete understanding of his new boundaries and a willingness to let him set the pace of his recovery. They would need to learn to celebrate the small victories while accepting that the Ranger they once knew might never fully return. After 2 weeks of slow but steady progress, Jake felt ready to take a significant step forward in rebuilding their relationship with Ranger. The dog had begun sleeping closer to the house, sometimes even dozing on the porch instead of under it. He would eat while they watched from nearby windows, and his eyes had started to hold something more than just cautious observation. There was recognition there, and perhaps even the beginning of trust. Sarah noticed the change too. Ranger had started acknowledging her morning greetings with subtle ear movements, and sometimes she would catch him watching their activities through the windows, with what seemed like longing in his eyes. It was as if he wanted to be part of their family again, but couldn't quite convince himself it was safe to do so. One particularly pleasant evening, Jake approached his mother with an idea. "I think we should try letting him into the backyard," he suggested, his voice filled with careful optimism. "No leash, no pressure, just leave the gate open and let him choose." Sarah hesitated, concerned about pushing too far too fast, but she understood the importance of this step. They had to trust Ranger to make his own choices if they wanted him to trust them in return. They prepared the backyard carefully, setting out fresh water and Ranger's favorite treats from their old life together. Jake brought out his harmonica, ready to play the melodies that seemed to touch something deep in Ranger's memory. Sarah positioned herself on the back porch with one of the old storybooks, creating an atmosphere of familiar comfort. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the yard, Jake opened the gate. Ranger watched from his spot near the front porch, his ears alert and focused on their movements. They didn't call him or try to coax him. They simply went about creating the peaceful scene they had planned, letting the music and Sarah's soft voice fill the evening air. Minutes passed, and then, with cautious steps, Ranger appeared at the corner of the house. He surveyed the backyard, his nose working to process all the new scents. Jake continued playing, pretending not to watch, as Ranger took his first tentative steps into the enclosed space. The dog's movements were careful, deliberate, as he explored the perimeter of the yard. The peaceful moment was shattered by an unexpected burst of sound from the neighborhood. The local high school football team had won their game, and celebration fireworks exploded in the distance, their sharp cracks echoing through the quiet evening. Ranger's body tensed immediately, his survival instincts taking over. In a flash, he bolted toward the open gate. Jake's heart jumped to his throat as he watched their faithful companion run, not toward his old spot on the highway, but into the unfamiliar neighborhoods beyond their temporary home. The sound of fireworks continued, each burst driving Ranger further into panic. "Ranger, wait!" Jake called out, his voice cracking with desperation. But the dog was already disappearing into the gathering dusk, running from the noise and chaos that had triggered his deepest fears. Sarah grabbed her car keys, ready to follow, but Jake stopped her. "No, Mom," he said, his voice suddenly calm despite the tears in his eyes. "We can't chase him. That's not what he needs right now." He clutched the bone-shaped keychain that had become his constant companion since their reunion. "He needs to know we trust him to come back to us, just like he trusted us to come back to him." The next few hours were the hardest they had faced since finding Ranger. They sat on the front porch, keeping vigil just as he had done for 4 long years. The harmonica lay silent in Jake's lap, and Sarah's book remained closed. The only sounds were the distant echoes of celebration and the quiet prayers they both held in their hearts. As midnight approached, they heard the soft pad of paws on grass. Out of the darkness, Ranger emerged, his fur damp with evening dew. He stood at the edge of the property, watching them with uncertain eyes. This was the moment that would define their future together. Would he choose to return to his solitary vigil on the highway, or would he finally come home? In the hushed silence of that midnight hour, time seemed to stand still. Ranger stood at the edge of the property, his figure illuminated by the soft glow of the porch light. Jake and Sarah remained motionless on the steps, their hearts beating in sync with the weight of the moment. The choice before Ranger was clear. Return to the familiar solitude of his highway vigil, or take a leap of faith toward a renewed life with his family. Jake slowly reached into his pocket and withdrew the bone-shaped keychain, its metal surface catching the light. The small trinket had been more than just a piece of memorabilia. It had become a symbol of their unbroken connection, a tiny beacon of hope through years of separation. With trembling fingers, he held it out, letting it dangle from his hand. The gentle tinkling of the metal against itself caught Ranger's attention. His ears perked forward and his nose twitched as a familiar scent carried on the night breeze. The lingering traces of his old life mingled with the promise of a new beginning. He took one step forward, then another, his movements hesitant but deliberate. Sarah watched with tears streaming down her face as Ranger approached Jake. This time, there was something different in the dog's demeanor. The wariness that had characterized their interactions since the reunion was still there, but it was now overshadowed by something stronger. Recognition, not just of their faces or scents, but of the deep bond they had shared. When Ranger reached Jake, he didn't immediately retreat as he had done so many times before. Instead, he stretched his neck forward, his nose touching the keychain. The contact seemed to unlock something in his memory. A flood of moments, experiences, and emotions that 4 years of solitude had unable to erase. For the first time since their reunion, Ranger's tail began to wag, not the hesitant movement they had seen before, but the full, joyful expression they remembered from years ago. He pressed his head against Jake's hand, allowing the touch he had resisted for so long. The barrier of time and trauma began to crumble as Jake gently scratched behind his ears, finding the exact spot he had always loved. Sarah slowly joined them, kneeling beside her son. Ranger turned to her, and in his eyes she saw the faithful companion who had been part of their family for so many years. He leaned into her touch, accepting the embrace that spoke of forgiveness, understanding, and unconditional love. Together, they stood up and walked toward the house. This time, when they reached the door, Ranger didn't hesitate. He followed them inside, his paws crossing the threshold into their temporary home. It wasn't the house they had shared years ago, but it didn't matter. Home wasn't about the building, but about the hearts that beat within it. That night, Ranger chose to sleep at the foot of Jake's bed, just as he had done countless times in their past life. The familiar weight and warmth of his presence brought tears to Jake's eyes, happy tears that spoke of healing and new beginnings. In the days that followed, Ranger's transformation continued to unfold. He began to play again, chasing balls in the backyard and bringing his toys to Sarah and Jake. His bark, which they hadn't heard since the reunion, returned, a joyful sound that filled their home with life. The watchful guardian of the highway gradually gave way to the loving family companion they had known, though his protective instincts remained as strong as ever. Ethan Carter, who had followed their story from the beginning, wrote one final article about Ranger's journey. It wasn't just about a dog who had waited faithfully for 4 years, but about the power of love to heal, the strength of bonds that time cannot break, and the courage it takes to trust again after loss. The story touched hearts across the nation, reminding people that sometimes the greatest acts of faith are rewarded in ways we never expect. As summer turned to fall, Sarah, Jake, and Ranger prepared to return to their home in Denver. Their time in Texas had changed them all, teaching them lessons about patience, trust, and the enduring nature of true love. Ranger took one last look at his spot by the highway before jumping into their car, ready to begin the next chapter of their lives together. The faithful guardian had completed his vigil, finding his way back not just to his family, but to himself. His unwavering devotion had been matched by their patience and understanding, creating a bond that was stronger for having been tested by time and separation. In the end, it wasn't just Ranger who had come home. They had all found their way back to each other, guided by the light of unconditional love. Dear viewers, we hope Ranger's story has touched your hearts as deeply as it has touched ours. His journey of loyalty, faith, and love reminds us that some bonds can withstand any test of time. If you've been moved by this tale, please subscribe to our channel and give this video a thumbs up. Share your own stories of faithful companions in the comments below. We'd love to hear them. Don't forget to click the notification bell to stay updated with more heartwarming stories that celebrate the incredible bonds between humans and their animal friends. Until next time, remember that true love knows no boundaries and that sometimes the longest wait leads to the most beautiful reunions.